Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Last time we had such a great time talking about ransomware that today we'll talk about how to prevent it. Joining me is Jeremy Brown, a digital forensics and incident response specialist who came into Palo Alto Networks as part of the Crypsys group. Welcome, Jeremy.
Good afternoon. How are we, Navneet?
Great. Well, if you haven't watched Jeremy's first interview about his role as a ransomware negotiator, check it out using the link in the description below. Jeremy, as always, let's start with a fun question about you. If you could meet anyone, living or dead, who would you meet?
Who would I meet? That's a great question. I think I would have to go with Walter Payton. The reason being is his work ethic, right? How hard that guy worked. He never had the greatest skill set. He wasn't the fastest. He was the most hardworking individual on a football team, right? And look at what he did and what he accomplished. I kind of like to compare myself to that. I will outwork anybody. I put my nose to the grindstone. I've always been taught that. Repetition is key in this business. And also, just putting in the work and the effort to stay on top of all the new exploits, ransomware variants, threat actor groups, things of that nature. Ransomware isn't what it was just 2 years ago, guys, compared to what it's morphed into these days. 5 years from now, 3 years from now, it's going to be completely different. So if you don't work hard at it, if you don't do your open source intelligence and investigating on your own, learn how these threat actors operate based on the kill chain, what we call TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures, learn how they operate, you're never going to be able to put the puzzle back together for a client or customer and really figure out what happened and how to prevent it in the future. So again, I love Walter Payton. He's just always been a role model of mine. And I just love how hard the guy worked and the effort that he put into being the best that he could be.
Jeremy, let's talk about 5 things that organizations can do to protect themselves from ransomware. And let's start with basic. If organizations could do only one thing, what would that be?
Well, if it's only going to be one thing and one thing only, I would caveat my answer with this. You can spend as much money as you want on security, on appliances, a defense and depth approach and strategy. Your weakest link is always going to be users, right, guys? As a former pen tester and red teamer, we always caught people doing things they shouldn't do, right? And what I mean by that is clicking on that phishing email or clicking on that link, right? Or some type of admin that's giving people, rights that they shouldn't have. So I think that the number one rule would be user awareness training organizational wide, right? UAT is what we call it. So if people don't understand how this stuff works, then you're not going to be able to prevent it from a user level, which in most cases is how we see malware get introduced to an environment.
Great. So let's talk about other things. So what are some of the other things that organizations can do to prevent ransomware and stop being in that situation where they have to negotiate?
Yes, sir. So I think a few things will stick out, right? Patch management, keeping your systems, your servers, your applications up to date with the latest and greatest firmware patches, things like that. There's something along the lines of over 2,200 remote code execution exploits out in the wild each day that are new. So make no mistake about it, these guys are aggressive. They're always on the offensive, trying to poke holes in anything they can out there. So patch management's huge. I think that the practice of least privilege is also another thing. If you're a domain admin, you want to make sure you go through your Active Directory structure, make sure there's no stagnant or dormant accounts in there, make sure that there's no service accounts left from other people that may have worked there previous to you, just sitting around with admin privs, right? So I think that's another big thing. Obviously, upgrading from SMB version 1 to at least 2 or 3 is a huge thing. There's too many holes in SMB version 1, but sometimes that is tough to do for organizations that run legacy applications. I would also say, using the latest version of PowerShell versus the old versions is something we would recommend. And then defense in depth again. You'll hear me say that time over time. Is it always going to prevent an attack? No, but it is going to slow an intruder down, and it's going to increase the chance that something's wrong on your network, right? We just don't want you to have a firewall at your gateway. We want you to have something sitting behind that, maybe an IDS or IPS system, right? Intrusion detection or prevention system. Behind that, we want you to have maybe a DMZ where your important servers sit. Behind that, we want to see something like an EDR tool like Cortex XDR, right? And then you have your host-based protection, which is an AV solution. So the more hurdles and hoops that a threat actor has to go through, the chances are you're going to see something nefarious as a network admin or sysadmin or domain admin. And it's going to be harder for that threat actor to actually execute their ransomware at the end of the day.
Right. So let's summarize it for the audience. So you talked about user education first, right? And then we talked about patch management and account management. And then you talked about using the latest versions of software or protocols like SMB or PowerShell. And what did that summarize it correctly?
Yes.
And you also mentioned the defense in depth.
Yep, absolutely. Those are some of the top things that you can do. And there's many others, right? But at the end of the day, you got to kind of curtail it to your organization as a whole. So
that's great. Jeremy, this has been awesome. It's a quick episode that we talked about prevention and what steps you can take to prevent being in a situation where you have to negotiate with for your documents and intellectual property rights. Well, if you like this show, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and visit paloaltonetworks.com. See you in the next episode.